Welcome to the online worship service for March 7th, 2021. For the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Shenandoah Valley, I am the Reverend Dr. Julie Kane, and we're really glad that you're joining us today. Our service is called Living Our UU Values. It is part of the kickoff to this year's stewardship drive, which has a campaign theme of coming home. Now that we are a year into this prolonged quarantine in the COVID-19 pandemic, not only are we feeling some spring fever in anticipation of warmer and brighter days, we are still trying to manage our cabin fever, and thoughts of returning to come home to church on Sunday mornings is a bright spot on our horizon. We're so grateful that now we actually have 3 vaccines available, and the numbers of folks being able to receive the vaccine are slowly climbing, but we know we still have a ways to go before we can put this difficult time period behind us. All of us have been working hard, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, to keep our home fires burning during this quarantine year. I'm so grateful, as I know so many of you are, that we have our beloved community at the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Shenandoah Valley. We have been able to help each other so much in trying to cope and adapt to conditions of this pandemic year. Our church provides us with a spiritual home, even when we cannot be here together in this space physically. And beyond that, our Unitarian Universalist faith helps us to remember the bigger picture, how we are connected to the profound challenges in this world, our global home, at an historically trying time. Staying connected to our deepest values can help us to remain grounded, even when we may feel at our wits' end, a sensation that has become, unfortunately, all too familiar with us in this past year and is continuing before it subsides with so much continuing uncertainty around us. In the spirit of this difficult time, I offer opening words by the Unitarian Universalist minister, Scott Alexander. In a world with so much hatred and violence, we need a religion that proclaims the inherent worth and dignity of every person. In a world with so much brutality and fear, we need a religion that seeks justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. In a world with so many persons abused and neglected, we need a religion that calls us to accept one another and to encourage one another to spiritual growth. In a world with so much dogmatism and falsehood, we need a religion that challenges us to a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. In a world with so much tyranny and oppression, we need a religion that affirms the right of conscience and the use of democratic process. In a world with so much inequality and strife, we need a religion that strives toward the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all of us. In a world with so much environmental degradation, we need a religion that advocates respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. And in a world with so much uncertainty and despair, we need a religion that teaches our hearts to hope and our hands to serve. Thanks again for joining us today. And we are introducing something new into our Sunday online worship. Today, we'll have our first church family to help lead us in both our chalice lighting and the recitation of our covenant. That will be Christine, Erin, and her daughters, Maeve and Molly.
Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the entire congregation, I welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Shenandoah Valley. I'm Leslie Blackburn, your worship associate for today's service. We gather together with our doubts as well as our convictions, with our fears and our hopes, with our failures and our aspirations, with our sorrows and our joys. Whether you're joining us today for the first time or you've been a member or friend for many years, we're glad you're here. Whatever faiths you've known, if any, whatever your background, whoever you are, whomever you love, however you arrived here, you are welcome. Now, as Christine, Maeve, and Molly light the chalice, let us all join with them from our homes in the words for lighting our chalice.
And now for lighting of the chalice. In the light of truth, in the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share.
And now Christine, Maeve, and Molly will offer our covenant.
Good morning from our home in Front Royal. This is our covenant. Love is the spirit of this church. The quest for truth is a sacrament. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help our neighbor. To these ends we covenant one with another.
And now, before proceeding to the rest of our service, I invite you to join with me in a time of silence, as we have done all of these many weeks of the pandemic quarantine, lifting up in our hearts and minds all those who are suffering adverse effects from the COVID-19 virus, and with hopes for some relief package to come soon. Please join me in the silence. May courage, compassion, and creativity light the way forward for all of us. Amen.
The following words of reflection celebrate how our Unitarian Universalist communities provide a spiritual home for so many of us. There are two short readings, one from our hymnal called Singing the Living Tradition, and the other from the fairly new reading supplement to the hymnal called Lifting Our Voices. The first reading, found in our gray hymnal, is by the Unitarian Universalist minister Mark Morrison Reed. The central task of the religious community is to unveil the bonds which bind each to all. There's a connectedness, a relationship discovered amid the particulars of our lives and the lives of others. Once felt, it inspires us to act for justice. It is the church that assures us that we are not struggling for justice on our own, but as members of a larger community. The religious community is essential, for alone our vision is too narrow to see all that must be seen, and our strength too limited to do all that must be done. Together, our vision widens and our strength is renewed. The second reading from the reading supplement is by the eco-feminist writer, teacher, and activist, Starhawk. We are all longing to go home to some place we have never been, a place half remembered and half envisioned we can only catch glimpses of from time to time. Community. Somewhere there are people to whom we can speak with passion without having the words catch in our throats. Somewhere a circle of hands will open to receive us, eyes will light up as we enter, voices will celebrate with us whenever we come into our own power. Community means strength that joins our strength to do the work that needs to be done. Arms to hold us when we falter, a circle of healing, a circle of friends, someplace where we can be free.
About 10 years ago, while I was serving the UU Church in Pensacola, part of my community ministry was helping to launch a contemporary women's collective group based largely at the local university. The group sponsored several community events and sometimes partnered with other organizations. One event we hosted was in collaboration with the Women's Study Program at the university. We brought Starhawk, the author of the last reading, in for a keynote address and a panel, which I was a community member on, around the topic of earth-based spirituality to help us address the environmental challenges of climate change. Starhawk is one of the most respected voices in modern earth-based spirituality. She is well known as a global justice activist and organizer, whose work and writings have inspired many to action. She's the author or co-author of over 10 books, including what is now considered a classic in the field, The Spiral Dance, A Rebirth of the Ancient Religion of the Great Goddess, and the book that was recently released just before her visit in Florida those 10 years ago. It was called The Earth Path, Grounding Your Spirit in the Rhythms of Nature. There is much to honor and celebrate in our UU faith tradition. The inclusion of the seventh principle, where we covenant to affirm and respect the interdependent web of existence of which we are a part, is hugely relevant and a very contemporary aspect of our faith, along with its corresponding source for our living tradition, which is to honor the spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions, teaching us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. Earlier in my ministry, while still in seminary, I was part of a new student organization called the Seventh Principle Project, whose core leaders eventually went on to launch the Justice Affiliate, now called UU Ministry for the Earth, and with it, the Green Sanctuary movement within our UU congregations, challenging us in our church buildings and campuses to become eco-friendly with all of our practices. It seems to me that almost every month during this COVID-19 pandemic, we have witnessed the signs of accelerated climate change around the world and its impact on human communities. With this deadly winter storm in Texas being the most recent catastrophe. I am so proud that our Social Action and Justice Committee here at the church have helped to spearhead a local chapter of the Citizens Climate Lobby dedicated to raising public awareness and do legislative advocacy. This has all happened just in this past year. This is just one example of the ways in which our congregation and its members are living our UU values out in the world. There are so many other examples, I won't be able to name all of them today. But I do want to update you on a related project at the church, which is still in the works. Some of you may know there's been some discussion in recent years about creating an educational nature trail on our church property. We hope to offer this as a multi-generational effort, getting families with kids involved, and as a way of sharing our church as a resource for the larger community. Part of the renewed energy for this project actually has to do with the pandemic quarantine. Since we are not able to safely gather on Sunday mornings here in the sanctuary or in our Sunday school classrooms with the kids, we are looking to create more outdoor opportunities for us to be together, celebrate our UU values, learn, and do some good service work. As the spring comes, we hope to schedule more and more outdoor activities, including a return of the popular and spirit-lifting bonfires that we had earlier this year. And at the same time, we are researching the most effective ways we can prepare our building and safety protocols so that we can begin to have groups meeting back here, starting slowly and with smaller groups at first, but gearing up for a full return to Sunday services, hopefully by the start of our usual new program year in August. Even then, of course, we will have to be doing many things differently, especially because much of our congregation will remain at risk for future variants based on age and pre-existing conditions. So another thing that we are doing, besides preparing to reopen the church building gradually, is to develop ongoing ways for people to participate in congregational life, even at a physical distance. For example, our plan for the future when we are able to gather in the sanctuary is for these Sunday services to be available weekly as live streamed events for those who are not able to attend in person, and for the live stream services to be recorded for future viewings. In fact, maybe some of you don't know, but on our church website all of our recorded services from the beginning of this pandemic quarantine are available for repeat viewing. Another example of new ways for us to stay connected with each other and our church community, especially with those who are not able or interested in the Zoom opportunities, is our neighborhood groups linked up through a phone tree, which is at the back of our church directory, and our newest endeavor, a buddy system that has paired community members as peer companions as we go into this hopefully last stretch of the prolonged quarantine. We have all had to be creative and resilient in adapting to COVID-19 and the global reaching disruptions it has caused to our daily lives. But we know it's not just the virus or even climate change that has caused more than one of us to feel at our wits' ends during this time. Here in the United States, we have been faced with new and ever more threatening levels of political instability at the highest levels of government. Not only have we entered a terribly unfamiliar, uncharted territories in terms of environmental disasters and global health, we have entered uncharted territory in defense of American democracy. Our country has joined many other parts of the world in a slowly rising tide of xenophobia and isolationist nationalism. And its fear-based orientation has grown in ever larger public acts of armed resistance, culminating most recently in the insurrection by an angry mob at the nation's Capitol building on January 6th, while Congress was in session to finalize the results of the last presidential election. While there were many warning signs for some time, the day's events on January 6th were excruciating to witness. Perhaps just like climate disaster and the global pandemic, we never thought we would have to see or live through such a thing as that. And yet, it happened. And the political instability it expressed about the current state of the United States has not diminished since Inauguration Day. No, threats continue, and the signs of militant and outlandish public representatives are continuing. This weekend, we are waiting to see if a new administration will be able to achieve a long-awaited and overdue public relief package for the millions suffering terribly in our country due to COVID-19, intruding upon their lives and livelihoods. This past year, we have faced massive national challenges beyond the scope of our imaginations. And we have faced massive public failures beyond our imagination. The United States has, upon a few occasions, lost its footing as a leader in the world community. The proportionally high level of pandemic deaths is a clear indication that we have experienced that. And yet, we can also be deeply impressed and grateful that our country has mobilized to generate not one, but 3 vaccines for the general public in creating immunity to the devastating symptoms of the COVID-19 virus. As a local clergy person, I was put on the 1A list along with those over 65 and healthcare workers. I personally had decided to wait and to get the vaccine because of my limited exposure and my age and how many of our community members over 65 who were anxious for a good reason to get their first priority vaccinations. Thankfully, with the newly approved Johnson & Johnson vaccine, yesterday I was able to get the vaccine. And at the same time, I can't hesitate for a moment to join with other voices in saying very loudly and firmly, we must continue to use other precautionary measures such as masking and physical distance so that we can put this painful and deadly pandemic behind us, all of us, as soon as possible. As we are contemplating how we can live our UU values in the world at this uniquely challenging time in history, we're keeping our home fires burning at our church through continued financial support and participation, and in our larger communities by practicing civic responsibility. In this spirit, I want to offer a UU poem hot off the presses to close my message today. Profoundly, I feel this poem not only speaks to the metaphor and perhaps even existential challenge of this coronavirus, it also speaks to the current political crisis in which we find ourselves. The outcomes for both remain uncharted territory and very uncertain. A UU colleague and former religious educator and now prolific poet, Lynn Unger, wrote this poem just last Thursday, March 4th. As is not unusual in our living tradition of Unitarian Universalism, I know not only Lynn from my time in seminary, but also I've worked with both of her parents, Arliss and Art, who have been longtime lay leaders in our denomination. The poem is simply titled Vaccine. Perhaps it is offensive to be saved by something so small. Better to confront a deadly foe with a sword or a gun or a flying kick or really anything dramatic enough to meet the weight of the moment. Maybe you would like to declare that you aren't scared, that your world is safe, that you are working without a net because you cannot fall. Sometimes bravado is what gets us through. Or maybe you are just not ready for this difficult truth. The key to defeating the enemy is to let some small part of it in. In closing, I invite each of you to spend time reflecting this week on how our Unitarian Universalist faith is helping you to live your values in this world at such a precipitous time as this. May we each be strengthened by the faith and our beloved community that we create together as we continue to move through these difficult days. May it be so.
Mystery of His love, arise in this world.
As I extinguish the flame, let us say together from our homes the words for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of our community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. The purpose of the church is to encourage all who gather to grow more generous in spirit and in action. We hope you will consider making an offering after today's service through our webpage, uushenandoah.org. This will allow us to exercise the generosity of spirit for this self-supporting church and its many ministries, which continue while we're not able to be physically together. And we invite you to join our church community at noon at our virtual post-service gathering for joys and concerns, followed by our coffee hour conversations and smaller breakout groups. The Zoom link is found in your UUCSV email. Thanks for joining us today.
And before I offer today's closing words, I want to let you know that we have another new feature to our online worship for this month as a part of our stewardship campaign called Coming Home. We have our first member testimonial, and it is being offered today by Abby Darkangelis. She is a church member, a resident church musician, and was actually also the worship associate for last Sunday's service. In addition to that, we're so excited because Abby and her husband Phil were married in our sanctuary, and I was privileged to perform that happy occasion. And this year, during all of the difficult news, we've had a bright ray of good news because Abby and Phil are expecting their first child, and we're so excited. So we look forward to hearing what Abby has to share with us today. And I want to also tell you that at our noon Zoom gathering this month, we will be having a weekly drawing for wonderful baskets of delicious items and fun stuff for all who have completed their pledges for next year. So consider joining us, especially if you've already made your pledge. Our closing words are by one of my Unitarian Universalist colleagues, Laura Lynn Bellamy. If here you have found freedom, take it with you into the world. If you have found comfort, go and share it with others. If you have dreamed dreams, help one another that they may come true. If you have known love, give some back to a bruised and hurting world. Go in peace, stay safe, and stay strong. We'll see you next time.
I first started attending UUCSV nearly 9 years ago when I moved to the area. Not knowing a single soul in the valley, I was longing to find a community of people who were open-minded, diverse in their backgrounds, welcoming, and inclusive. I also have always embraced self-examination and growth as personal values, and so I desired a spiritual community that would inspire and hold that space with me. What I found here was that and so much more. Long before becoming a church member, I was welcomed into the choir. What a joyous, loving fellowship to be welcomed into, and a meaningful introduction to this community. Pam, Elaine, and all the individuals who deeply enrich our services with their shared musical talents will always be of personal importance to me as a vital part of this church and our services. And though it may seem obvious, Sunday services are also why I attend the church. The diverse topics and broad-minded explorations of faith guided by Reverend Julie leave me feeling validated, re-energized, and better equipped with skills and knowledge to help me live a fulfilled life of engagement and purpose. I also feel fortunate to have found a community in which to raise our child, where our values will be reflected and our child will be supported in questioning and learning about the world and spirituality. I look forward to the day when he can participate in the children and youth religious education programs. Lastly, what makes me proud to belong to such a loving spiritual home are each of you in this community. We are diverse in talents, faiths, and life stories, and we extend invitations and conversations that encourage and celebrate each person's unique gifts. Whether it's the Heart to Heart Cafe, auction, picnic, coffee hour, various committees, or numerous initiatives in the greater community, these special gatherings are where I see the true goodness of our members in action. Similarly, Phil shares that it is enriching to be amongst people who are genuinely happy to be with each other and who are genuinely interested in contributing positively. It brings much needed joy and goodness to both our personal world and the greater world around us. So these are just some of the many reasons why I support this church.